Good morning, everybody. This is Ann Swain, and welcome to our webinar for Thursday, the 9th of April. You may not be aware of this, but today is International Recruiters Day. That might be something you might think that APSCo has made up, but actually it does really exist. It was something that was set up in 2011 to celebrate the skill sets, the professionalism and the dedication of recruiters on a global basis, and to make sure that we are perceived to be adding value across the board to different countries, economies, and to make a difference to the world of work. So, happy International Recruiters Day. What I will say is, APSCo have been running a number of webinars, as you may well know, on getting different views, originally from a legislational change point of view, but also on how the COVID-19 crisis is unfolding specifically within the recruitment market. And I'm very pleased to introduce our panel today. We have, as ever on these, Tania Bowers, who is legal counsel for APSCo, and will focus on answering any of the legal questions that you might have. We have Bev White, who is the brand new, as of February this year, CEO of leading recruitment organisation Harvey Nash. Bev has spent a number of years within the recruitment market, a few years running as CEO GI Group, and then 14 years on the board of Penna. And so welcome to APSCo, Bev. Welcome in from a Harvey Nash point of view. But boy, oh boy, did you pick your timing. And then can I also welcome Harry Cullen, who is a founder and the director of Introprotect, which is an organisation looking at making sure that you get, as a recruitment company, the money that you are owed from a range of different things. I think that between our three panel members, we will have fantastic answers to your questions on any of these subjects, and we'll cover a range of things. What I would like to do is to say, please do not be shy about asking questions. Get those questions in and we will go through them. What tends to happen in these webinars is that we end up at the end of an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, we end up with a whole load of questions that we simply do not have time to ask. So please don't be shy. We are recruitment people after all. Why don't we get your questions in? And then why don't I kick off? Bev, I'm going to come to you first of all, if that's all right. You've arrived into Harvey Nash at, well, either the best possible time or the worst case scenario with regard to becoming the new CEO of a global recruitment and outsourcing and a technology business, obviously. How have you been welcomed in, and what's your initial thoughts of the market?
Gosh, thank you, Anne. So I'm going to say at the best possible time. I think my welcome, let's start with that. I think those of you that know Harvey Nash know that it has reputationally a really family-oriented values system. And so I really felt that from day one. And in many ways, it feels very similar to the world I came from in Penna. So warm welcome, lots of open questions, really felt like part of the family from day one. Got to know as many people as possible, and then we know what happened next. So I think what this has given us the opportunity to do, though, is get to know each other much more deeply, much more personally, faster. So it feels like one day is almost like a year. And so, you know, the learning's been fast about the people that I'm working with and of, you know, them getting to know me. And then equally getting to know really the in-depth nature of each of our businesses in each of the countries we operate from. So it's been really fast learning. It's a pace I love. And I'm working with such bright, smart people. It really makes it a pleasure.
Great, thank you. And how do you feel that Harvey Nash are coping with the current crisis? And what would you say from a strategic point of view, your focus is going to be?
Yeah, great questions. Well, for sure, we're a technology and solutions business, as you said, and so technology has never been more needed than right now. Not every organisation could just lift its people and let them work from home or even operate their businesses in that way. So there's been a big uptick in requirements for support and for solutions, which is excellent because we can help people really straightforwardly. And so that was the first thing. I think that the future, well, that's a really interesting point. I mean, there's lots of different dimensions I think we're all learning about. This isn't like anything we've had before. It really isn't. I think if anything, it's taught us that we can work in a virtual way and actually do that really effectively. I think it's also taught us what we want and need socially from work as well. So I think I'm focused on the future, most definitely. Getting us through these moments, working with our people, because fundamentally that's what we are. We're a people business, so we're connecting with our people every single day, making sure they're okay, and anything we can do for them. Secondly, we're looking at where the opportunities are emerging. So as organizations discover that they can work more virtually, they can operate in a digital space, we're looking at which sectors are most likely going to need that, and we have solutions and people that we will be bringing to the table.
Fantastic, thank you. Barry, let me come on to you. In running Introprotect, that main focus, as I mentioned earlier on, is really about making sure that end user clients pay for the service that they've had. Are you finding that there's been a big push for recruitment companies to come to you and ask for your services at this time? I think you're on mute, Barry.
Good spot. I was trying not to interrupt Bev with my coffee drinking while she was talking. So good spot, thanks. Yes, we're in that first week, our inquiries went up 4-fold. In the week after that, they've gone up another 12-fold. So to say that we're busy is a bit of an understatement. It's one of those unfortunate things that in difficult economic times, litigators, debt recovery people, they get busy. It doesn't put a smile on my face, but that's unfortunately the economic reality. And we've had to sort of flex our resource to make sure that we're able to cope with the workload. Because primarily our responsibility is to make sure, and you were talking about, surviving. We're going to make sure our clients survive this, because as Dave mentioned, there are opportunities here in this sort of market. Yes, it's completely alien to anything we've seen before. I don't think any of us, even us lot, I don't think any of us were working in 1918. I don't think there's a really a comparison, but to the extent that we do have comparisons, death of .com, year 2K, 2008, and various other fairly major economic shifts, we've all, found opportunities to become leaner, tighter, better run businesses as a result. Making sure you get paid so there's enough revenue to come in to get you through this period. That's obviously an important part of it.
Yeah, actually, I've been put in a kind of awkward position on numerous times, actually, in the last few weeks, where we've had a number of our members wanting me to sort of slap, let's say, verbally, one of the big suppliers from a social media point of view, who are looking to enforce contracts. And my dilemma is, one, I cannot stand there telling APSCo members and recruitment companies not to pay their bills when we are asking customers to pay their bills. And it's been quite a dilemma of trying to make sure that people play this fairly and appropriately across the board, but that we shouldn't be doing things that we don't want to be done unto ourselves, let's say. What's your view, Barry? Obviously, cash is king. And it would be good for suppliers to us if they do look at having some level of flexibility in the same way as I'm sure we're having to do with some of our clients. What's your view about winning at both ends? Can we do that, or do we need to be fair and appropriate?
Well, I suppose there's a difference there between the commercial relationship and the legal positions. The legal positions you probably can win at both ends. If you want to take that position. karma's a bit of a bitch in the long run, though, and I generally find that if you don't play it fair both ways, you'll come a cropper at some point. Clients are asking us, what should we be doing, in relation to getting paid, and we're saying, look, chuck out your credit control process, because that it's normally a fairly standard 4 or 5 stage process of friendly email, second slightly less friendly email, slightly more terse, come on guys, pay, and then starting to threaten people. Those timescales need to be adjusted massively, and you need to be foreshortening things. What we effectively say is that you need to be looking at your clients is 2 categories. Category 1 is, this is a client that will survive this, and we want to be part of their coping strategy and their mechanism to make sure they survive it. And in those relationships, you want to be looking at fee deferments. You want to be looking at maybe payment plans, or even fee discounts or write-offs in order to help them. But then the other type of client who aren't going to survive, or who frankly aren't the good clients anyway, they're keeping you on massively low margins, they're not letting you have any control in the processes. They're often the clients where actually it's a difficult decision to make, but if they fall into that category, you've just got to get yourself paid. So I think it's really a much more commercially driven decision, both on your client side and your supplier side, as to which relationship you want to protect, and which companies, whether they're a client or a supplier, that you want to help through this sort of process. But ultimately, you've got to be in business at the end of it. Sometimes that decision isn't really a commercial or even an ethical decision. Some people just don't have any money, and therefore to protect their own staff, and ultimately that's what we're talking about here, right? If there's no money coming into the agency, then there's no money to pay staff. In that situation, I think you've got to look after your people first.
Okay, thank you. Tania, let me come to you by way of intro. For anyone who's been kind of signing in to these webinars, they'll know you very well. From a lobbying point of view, where you are spending a huge amount of your time, I'm wondering, in the journey this far, which has been pretty laden with brand new legislation pretty much done on the hoof, and then guidance following on a week or so behind, do you feel that we've had everything come through? Are we waiting for anything else that affects recruitment companies at the moment?
I think we've had some success in terms of our letter to the Chancellor that you sent a few weeks ago around the bank scheme, the loan scheme, although I'm reading in the papers this morning that there's still a lot of disquiet, that the banks aren't playing ball, that they're not being fair, and that they're not acting like this is an emergency situation, and they're not being fast enough. So I think, there's some pressure still to be put there, and you're right, as you've written to the Shadow Chancellor and you're writing to the Shadow Business Secretary today to just say there still needs to be pressure on the banks and on the Chancellor to make sure that bank loan scheme works. I think from our members' perspective, the big issue that we're trying to get some clarity on is around furloughing agency workers. There's 2 big issues for our members. Firstly, agency workers obviously aren't working during furlough. The normal process is they accrue holiday pay as they work. That flows down from the client through the recruiter to the worker. If the agency needs to find the extra holiday pay when people are on furlough, this really does make furloughing of agency workers very difficult. It's an extra 12% that they're not going to get back from the government. So we're, along with other trade bodies, we're trying to put pressure and get clarity there. So I think that's the main point. The second one is around the public sector. We've got a webinar with the Crown Commercial Service next week, but a note's come out to the public sector saying you should be continuing to pay your contingent workers 80%, but clearly the public sector is huge. It's hundreds of different bodies, and it's very difficult to know how to make that happen in practice in a short time span. So I think they're the two big issues that we're still pushing on.
We're definitely getting a lot of questions on both of those issues. Why don't I go now to our first question, which actually is about umbrellas and holiday pay. Let me read it for you. Can umbrellas recover the cost of holiday entitlement accrued whilst on furlough from the worker's payroll when they come off furlough? Let me go to Tania on this one.
I would have said it sounds to me like a deduction from wages, because if the worker's entitled to the holiday, then it's hard to conceive of a situation where the worker could effectively have to pay the holiday back if that's what's being suggested. I don't know whether any of the other panelists have a view on that.
Does anyone have a view on that? No, I think it was one for Tania. Okay, so can they recover the cost of holiday, or what should they do?
I don't think they can recover it from the worker. I think there is a question mark, and again, this is very much my opinion, but there's a question mark over whether agency workers accrue holiday if they are on furlough. Umbrella workers are employees, so they're in a slightly more complicated situation as well than agency workers that tend to be workers, not employees. But if they don't pay the holiday to the worker during the furlough period, which is one option, then I think they have to recognise that there may be that, you know, they have to allow for that holiday pay and recognise that they may need to pay the worker that holiday pay in future. That, I suppose, is the other commercial way of looking at it. But I don't think you can pay it and then try and reclaim it back from the worker.
Okay, thank you. Barry, this is one that I think kind of comes directly to you. Are you seeing anybody asking about people who may have been furloughed during a rebate period? And does this affect a fee that would be charged, obviously, on a perm placement, or would it come under just putting together a payment plan?
Yes, I think they're two sort of almost unrelated issues. My view on impact on furlough and rebates is that the rebate clock will continue to click and tick during that furlough period. It's completely untested waters, though. I could see defendants or clients in the future, once we get to the other end of this, because that's when it's more likely to come up. People haven't really started thinking about this as the fee-paying client yet. I can see them trying to run arguments that while someone was furlough, they weren't working, and therefore it doesn't technically fall within the rebate period. You know, and there's some wisdom of Solomon logic to that argument. I would need to consider it more closely, but my starting point would be, and it would be this, right, because I'm a lawyer to the recruitment industry, my starting point is that the clock keeps ticking. So if the rebate clock runs, it keeps running, and therefore the client's running out of time to make decisions when people come back from furlough in the future. I think that's a slightly different question, although it's been written and poised in the same thing. I think it's a slightly different question to whether you should be agreeing payment plans with clients. If you're a very forward-thinking agency, and if you are not so tight on cash that you will be able to survive this, and here's another hoop, so there's two hoops, here's a third one, and if these are clients that you want to be supporting through this and building your relationship with so that they see you as a very supportive partner in the talent chain, you might say to them, look, we've taken a view that you pay the fee now, but we will stop the clock ourselves on a unilateral basis. It's not a contractual position, but we will stop the clock. So that if somebody's off work for 11 weeks on furlough, we won't treat that 11 weeks as part of the rebate period. But that would be, in my view, very much a commercial decision. It's something that you are offering to your client as a goodwill gesture to support them through this, rather than necessarily because you have to from a legal perspective.
I mean, I think the reality is case law is going to be, you know, probably a few years away with regard to these scenarios. And it would seem fair and appropriate commercially to not include a long furlough period in a rebate period. Bev, do you have a view generally? I'm not saying what would Harvey Nash do in this, but do you have a view of what somebody should do? That if there's a 3-month rebate period on a perm placement, do you think it would be fair if 11 weeks of that were in a furlough scenario?
Gosh, not one we've come across yet, but I certainly think, you know, everything we're doing both with clients and our people and our own suppliers is, you know, take a view on a long-term position here. So, you know, we're a strong business. We want to continue having good relationships with all of those parties going forward. So I certainly would look at it. I certainly would look at it for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, with some of our clients, I think, you know, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to say there isn't any doubt in my mind. I think it's worth a consideration.
Yeah, I think so too.
But I think what's really important in that is that it needs to be a decision made as partners between client and recruiter. Clients can't have both ways. They can't not pay the bill and have it an extended rebate period. So my view is if you're going to be offering something like that to a client, it needs to be on the basis that they're still meeting their obligations to pay their bill on time, much like they would do in a normal rebate scenario. So pay the bill on time, we'll then agree to pause the clock and restart it when the person comes back to work. You know, that's me as a commercial decision that I would make if I was running my own business.
I think that makes perfect sense. There's a quid pro quo then realistically, 100%. And it does make sense. Okay, 100%. Let me come on to the next question. This looks like another one for you, Barry, at the moment. What do I do if clients are pulling offers? What can I do?
Well, hopefully you get in a DeLorean, go back in time a little bit and make sure you're using APSCo standard terms. Because if you're using APSCo standard terms, then pulled offers will at least have an administration fee, a cancellation fee associated with them, in which case you are still enabled contractually and legally to require payment. You might choose to use that as leverage commercially to advantage yourself in the relationship. So what you might again do, and these commercial decisions again, you might say to the client, look, you pulled the offer, you owe the money, and pay it, and then we'll sit on it as a credit so that when the world comes back on its feet and you are looking ultimately to fill this job again, give it to us on exclusive. We've already been paid. We'll treat that payment as a credit towards that free replacement effectively. But again, that's about that quid pro quo that you mentioned. You know, the client can't have it both ways. They can't say we're not paying you and we're going to go out to the mob of 20 agencies on contingency when we're starting to hire this person back in again, because you've already done the work, right? And if you've already done the work, they've made a commercial decision to pull it. Yes, I understand why they've made that decision, but it doesn't change the fact that you've done the work and therefore should be paid for your services.
Yeah. Bev, do you have at Harvey Nash any of your client base? I mean, it's a global client base, and I would assume a lot of big organizations that are your customers. Are you finding that the FDs of those customers are wanting to have conversations about changing payment terms, or are they not doing that yet?
I think we've had a few examples, perhaps in industries that are perhaps under more pressure. So travel, we don't have huge exposure to any one sector. That's the good news about our business. But where they've done that, we've certainly had a conversation. As Barry said, it has to be a two-way conversation here. You know, it cannot be a one-sided arrangement. So we've made, where requested, some changes, but with an upside when things come back. So the good news in these conversations has been, you know, sheer response has been phenomenal. And, you know, I genuinely think I've seen people come to the table in good faith right now. I've not seen examples where it's been, you know, roll over, do what we say.
Good.
Oh, we've seen a few of those, Bev. But you know, if it comes to us, it's generally because it's a problem already, right? In fact, one of the best examples I've seen recently was a tech recruiter client of ours who got into an unusual situation in that their client paid their bill in full. Then the client, after paying it, realized that they were actually in such a cash pinch that they couldn't afford to do it. So even though they paid the money out, it effectively became a preferential payment. And the client came to the recruiter and said, look, what can we do? And this particular recruiter is so forward thinking, and they have a client for life here now, that they actually reverse agreed a payment plan, refunded the money to the client, and then allowed the client to go into a fairly protracted payment plan. I mean, you know, that client's never going anywhere else in the future, right?
I should hope not. Okay, let's get on to some more questions. We've had one come in that's asked, and this I'm going to direct at you, Bev, if it's okay. What are we seeing in the US market? Obviously, Harvey Nash has a big exposure in the States. What are you seeing in the US market?
So similarly, I think our Nash Tech business, which is our solutions offshoring business, is actually seeing a surge of interest. Organizations perhaps that had run their own shop up until this crisis are now finding that less attractive. And so that's been an uptick. We're seeing that the tech sector is doing well, actually continuing to do well. So no surprise, tech recruitment and flexible employment model over a permanent one is more favoured. So where people perhaps were considering permanent roles, at the moment they're asking for interims or contractors.
Yeah, fair enough. And across Europe, anything different in the European landscape for you?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. So in our in the Netherlands, for example, and I'm going to touch wood here as I say this, it's almost like you really don't want to say it, but doing incredibly well, continuing to be quite buoyant. And I've seen, you know, other reports saying that isn't the case, but our contracting base is so far doing extremely well, and we're continuing to pick up permanent roles which we're filling, you know, this month. So that's good. In Belgium, I'd say, you know, we have a very strong business that teaches people to get into the industry of tech. So we train them in, you know, being security specialists, coding, and so on. And people are thinking about that now more for the long term. So we're getting people that are interested, perhaps not signing yet, but are saying, you know, tell me how it works. So forward order book for that is good. Switzerland, I think it varies. I think, you know, again, we probably all have seen reports in the Swiss market, you know, of varying degrees, but I think the business is holding up quite well. You know, we've got some very senior assignments there, so they seem to be proceeding. Poland, pretty strong. So that's a growing area for us. Germany, I think, mixed picture, but a number of, you know, good long-standing clients continuing to want to continue with, you know, the work we have in progress. So, yep, Vietnam is our offshoring business where we have 2,000 people, and you know, there's a big demand for our work out there, which is fantastic. So, yeah, mixed picture, but you know, for sure we've seen perm on the whole soften, not enormously, but soften from where it was perhaps 2 or 3 weeks ago. But contracting holding up well.
Okay, great. The countries that you've mentioned reminds me of something that I say to a lot of member meetings. So members out there that will have heard me say it will smile. But I've always said when looking to expand as a recruitment company or indeed as a tech business, when looking to expand across Europe, only bother opening up in the beer drinking countries rather than the wine drinking countries, because the wine drinking market does not understand contracting, but the beer drinkers and producers absolutely do. I think I stole that some years ago from John Nerthen of the Staffing Industry Analyst, but it holds up pretty well and can be a good rule of thumb if anyone out here is even contemplating opening up in Europe. Forget the wine drinking countries, and you can tell that Harvey Nash have done exactly that. Quite right too. Okay, let's get back to some other questions. You might want to do some other due diligence on countries rather than just use that as your decision-making tool, but it's a decent rule of thumb, I would say. So a question here, a number of questions asking about payment plans. Should we be doing payment plans? What would a payment plan look like if I were going to negotiate a payment plan. Let me come on to you, Barry. What would you suggest a payment plan could look like?
Sure. Just in case any of the people listening weren't here at the start, what I covered really briefly at the start was the commercial decision-making process behind whether or not to offer a payment plan to a client. And my view on that was you should be making that decision based on whether you think the client's going to survive the crisis and whether you think you have the sort of relationship that you want to support them through that. That's how I would be making the decision as to whether to offer payment plans to particular clients. The other clients that I might offer payment plans to are the ones where it is very clear that they're critically short on cash, because you could actually just end up making them go pop. At least if you get a 12-week payment plan in place and it takes them 4 weeks to go bust, then you've got 4 weeks worth of payments, before that happens, which is better to get some cash in. So yes, I think that's how I would make the decision. But as to how to structure them, it's really, 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 really important to get it right, because when you're making this either a variation to terms or whether you're setting out a payment plan, you need to have real certainty as to what's been agreed. I've seen payment plans in the past where the way the recruiter had structured it, as an example, would be they said, look, just pay us over 12 months. The recruiter took that to mean you'll pay us 12 equal installments over 12 months. The client took it to mean I'll pay you £1 a month for 11 months and I'll pay the rest on month 12. And it left that uncertainty, which arguably meant that actually what the client was doing was okay. So you need to make sure you're having a really frank conversation, getting absolute, like closing a deal in the first place, get absolute certainty on every facet of it. Make sure it's put down in writing, make sure it's clear, and also protect yourself. If anybody here, I'm guessing everyone that's watching is an APSCo member. So if you go onto the APSCo site, the coronavirus hub that you've created, we put together a guide and a sort of template for payment plans. And it's just free, so people can just go on and use it. And the important thing is you need to set out the provisions of what happens if they don't meet the terms of the plan, because you can get a scenario where you agree payments over 12 months, and if they make 2 payments and then default, you technically could only potentially sue them for the 3rd month. And then you have to wait a month before the next one falls due, before you can then sue them for the next, and then the next. So you're sort of delaying your own enforcement protocols. Whereas if you have the right payment plan in place, where effectively you're making time of the essence of any payment, and in default of payment of any of them, the whole balance falls due. You can also make sure you've got your interest provisions clearly set out again, even if you agree to waive them if the payment plan's met, but if they default, then the interest kicks back in. And it's also a way, if you don't have a cost indemnity in your contract, you can effectively get a cost indemnity in through the back door, on the basis that you're agreeing these preferential payment plans. If they default, then you have your legal costs covered by them as well. And then also, just as a real final, and this is all in the plan, so nobody needs to remember it much, a sort of termination provision, if you will, a unilateral termination provision, so that you can withdraw the payment plan without notice or with immediate notice. So if you just decide, actually, we're about to go bust, we can't wait any longer, then you can just withdraw that payment plan unilaterally. Likewise, if the pandemic comes to an end, let's say the World Health Organization says the pandemic's over, then you need a provision which automatically stops the payment plan at that point in time. Or if the client goes into an insolvency process, you don't want to then be in a position where you're having to wait however many months for the payment plan. So you want those defaults, you want those worst case scenarios all to be in there. And if clients aren't agreeing to those sorts of things, bearing in mind you're being the very reasonable person who's giving these extended payment periods, then that tells you a lot about your relationship with the client, and it answers the original question of whether you should be agreeing it in the first place or not.
Okay, thank you. So I would say it's very well written, that guide, actually, in the Coronavirus Resource Hub. If you are going to step in time with doing any of those things, either give Barry a call or indeed go in and look at the guidance, which is very generously put on the APSCo Coronavirus Resource Hub. So thank you for that. A question here, are the courts still open? Tania, are courts open? Would they be interested in getting involved in this kind of commercial thing at the moment? I mean, I know it's different if you've actually pled guilty for manslaughter of 39 poor people in a truck, for heaven's sake. But are the courts open to deal with any of this kind of stuff, or are they closed for the time being?
Well, clearly anything that's happening is happening remotely. Probably one for Barry rather than me, actually. My understanding is no, I mean, obviously written work could be submitted, but in terms of hearings, I'm assuming that most of them aren't going ahead. But Barry, one for you, I think.
Yep, another lawyer we have here. So Barry, are the courts open?
Yes, yes, they are open. Without trying to be too full of pomp and self-importance, the justice system is really considered to be a central pillar to Western democracy. If you shut the courts, you're effectively shutting down part of civil society. So it's very important. The Supreme Court and the Lord Chancellor have been very clear on this, that we need to keep working and we need to keep the wheels of justice turning. That said, we need to be practical about it as well. We can't have everybody walking into a courtroom and sharing a virus around and what have you. So the diktat that's come down is that effectively the courts have put 2 tiers of work in place. One they call the must-dos, and one called the can-dos. And so enforcing trading contracts falls into the can-dos. So if something like child protection or something like that comes into play, that's a must-do. Whereas we still have to enforce trading contracts where that's possible. We're finding a lot more interims hearings taking place just on the judge considering the papers, so without actually a hearing taking place, just looking at the paperwork. But then we're also getting a lot more telephone hearings and video hearings as well. I think this is actually going to be a massive sea change for the civil justice system. The courts and judges, most of them are pretty, grey-haired old women and men who really haven't really engaged with technology much over the last sort of few years. They're starting to learn that actually it works. It cuts down a hell of a lot of travel time, which is one of the massive costs in the justice system. For lawyers charging £350 an hour, and they've got to travel 3 hours to a court and then 3 hours back again, for a 40-minute hearing. For most of the cost is stuck in the travel time. So I think the courts are recognizing that now. And I suspect, like many people realizing you can work from home, you can work remotely, there's all these advantages, the court system's going to start getting involved in that, which will hopefully, in the long run, actually start improving waiting times, because our court system was hammered by austerity.
Yeah.
You go into a court building, and for every 10 desks, you had probably 3 or 4 people sitting there, which just meant the wheels of justice turned massively slowly. And that's more challenging now, but I think there'll be upsides as well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, I think we're probably all in agreement that the nature of how people are working at the moment, the ones of us that are lucky enough to be able to work, will change the nature of work across the board without question in the recruitment market, and technology such as Zoom and other things will definitely have a huge impact, and it is already. Thank you. Let me get on to a couple more questions. A couple of furlough questions here, Tania. Any advice on what we say to people that are on furlough now, whom are asking what happens at the end of May?
I think all you can say is that you'll obviously keep in touch with them, you'll have the conversation as soon as the government gives an indication as to whether they intend to extend the furlough programme. If they don't extend the furlough programme, then each business will have to make a decision. I mean, on the face of it, people will then come back into work, and other alternatives would need to be considered if they still needed to cut costs. But obviously that's quite a difficult conversation, and you'd need to think about how you were going to communicate that with your staff.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. I own a recruitment firm along with one other founder. We are both directors and take a small salary, there you go, but pay ourselves with dividends. Can we furlough one of us? And is it just the salary element that we can get back? I know the answer to that, but Tania, why don't I come to you?
Yes, they can furlough one of them. And yes, under the furlough scheme, it's only 80% of the salary that they could get back, not anything in respect of the dividends. No.
Do they need, may I ask, do they need to, as directors and co-directors of a business, do they need to transfer the fiduciary responsibilities of one of those directors, the furloughed one, to the other person? How does that work?
Yes, the advice is that it's done by a board meeting, and that there is a minute made of that there is going to be one director furloughed, and what responsibilities in respect of the company is passed, are being passed to the other director during the furlough period. That's written in the government guidance.
And can you furlough yourself if you are the only director of a business? What happens to the fiduciary responsibilities if you're the only director of a business?
You can furlough yourself. Again, there should be a company note. Effectively, you can continue to perform your fiduciary duties of the business, as a director, albeit you're not performing your commercial duties. Okay. Fiduciary and company's house duties, the actual statutory duties of being a director.
Okay, I've got something on holiday pay, a couple of things on holiday pay. Let me come to you. We've had an indication from our HMRC contact that holiday pay guidance may be issued later today. Do we have any insight with regard to that?
Not specifically. I am expecting guidance at some point, but I don't have a specific insight as to timing. No, but I mean, clearly it's really needed, and not just for recruitment, across the whole economy.
I think the challenge in the whole of this situation is this: it's reaction. It has to be by its nature reactionary to the events. So in the normal course of business, government would come up with a policy idea. They would debate it. They would put it through committees. There'd be legislation drawn up and redrawn and redrawn and redrawn to cover off all the loopholes and eventualities and other sort of side considerations and the sort of Heisenberg uncertainties of, oh, if we do this, this happens. They get the time to do that. Whereas now, because they're having to react, they're having to make a pronouncement first and then figure out the details second. And we saw that with the pronouncement of the job retention scheme. Brilliant. As a die-hard Green Liberal voter, I was amazed to see a Tory party actually step up and do the right thing as I see it. But at that first moment, they made the announcement, and then all the accountants and lawyers went, what about self-employed? And then they came back a couple of days later and went, okay, so we've now got a scheme for self-employed. But what I thought was really interesting, really, really interesting, is on this directors of small companies issue. The government are reeling. They are reeling off the fact that they've had to delay IR35 private sector by a year. When they got up and announced this self-employed aspect, and I thought it was really unhelpful calling it self-employed, because I consider myself to be self-employed because I own and run my own business. But what they really mean is a sole trader, rather than necessarily somebody that works for themselves. So when they made the pronouncement in relation to the adjustments for the self-employed, Rishi made some real clear points that they did not intend to do this for directors of companies, and the directors of companies were very much not going to be getting the sort of support that the self-employed and the employed were getting. And they were on the basis that effectively they were saying, you fat cats have had it good enough for long enough, and we're not going to help you out. In my view, a massive economic mistake on their part and a massive political mistake on their part, because all of these regulations, the brush for regulation is so wide that it covers everybody, and it covers people that are true entrepreneurs that are actually running a business and taking the sorts of risks that they need to. But yeah, I thought that was just a very interesting aspect, that they made a real point of excluding directors of companies from this, rather than just having not thought about them initially and then coming back to the table a few days later to improve it again.
Yeah, thank you. Bev, can I come to you? Do you feel that for a company of the scale of Harvey Nash, that the government in the UK have done enough to offer support, whether you've picked any of it up or not. Do you feel that they've stepped in appropriately for the bigger companies as well as the smaller ones?
Yeah, good question. And by the way, really interesting questions coming up this morning. I think, yes, we have used what's available to us for sure to support, our people and our business in the future. I think there's some uncertainty still about, some big companies will get access, really supersized companies will get access to things that companies of our size will not. So we kind of fall in some ways between two stools. So I think it's still emerging. I think where we can, I think we've been really impressed in the governments around the globe, actually, how quickly they've been able to turn things on and make things available to help. So, that's a positive. I think there's still some unclear and, lack of clarity on some of the elements, some of which you've been talking about this morning. And I think we'll fall outside of scope of some of the sized offers of help, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay, we've had a few more questions on annual leave, holiday pay for furloughed workers, but we've answered that quite a bit. Once there's a different question on it, I'll put it forward, but bear with me. Here's a question again on furloughed workers. At the moment, our furlough workers have access to all of our systems. What is the position if they voluntarily continue to work? Should employers remove access to those systems? Should employers ask furloughed workers to cease doing work? What is best practice? Tania, let me come to you.
We get this question every time, don't we?
Every time, yes.
I think the government are very clear that workers should not be performing work for you or delivering services in respect of your organisation. I think they will look, obviously saying that the worker chose to do it, they volunteered to do it, is a bit of a get out of jail that the revenue are quite aware of. Our advice is they shouldn't be working. It's your grant that's potentially being jeopardised, and therefore if there is a risk that they are going to work, if they have access to the systems, then they shouldn't have access to the systems, and other people who aren't furloughed should effectively cover their email and cover whatever on their system. It's obviously harder to control on things like LinkedIn. You do have control if they work on your LinkedIn account rather than their own personal one, but you can't effectively stop them staying in touch with contacts on their personal LinkedIn. But I think you need to be clear with them what the parameters are.
So your advice would be to actually take furloughed staff off of use of the company system, to allocate covering their emails, somebody else to allocate, to cover those emails, to keep open their own personal LinkedIn or any other social media that's personal, but not the company one. And so what I think we would say very strongly is, please don't expect the government to cover 80% of salaries on your behalf if you're still expecting people to do a job of work for you. It's inappropriate, and actually you might get bitten pretty heavily in the bottom when this all finishes and checks are being made. How realistic is it that people are going to get caught out on this? Tania, what's your view?
How long's a piece of string, really? It depends ultimately on the amount of time, effort and money HMRC decide to put towards auditing, and also, I suppose, the due diligence they undertake before they actually pay the grant out in the first place, because there's not much said in the guidance about that at the moment.
Okay.
And remember too, excuse me, Criminal Finances Act is going to cover this off really clearly. So accountants, lawyers, they're going to be watching their own backs, because if they're helping you or allowing you to dodge the tax man, and frankly, and it is this higher bar, to steal off future generations, because we will ultimately all have to pay this money back in some form or another. I can tell you one thing for certain: if I find someone doing it, I'm going to be dobbing them in. There's no question at all. If I find anybody doing it, they ain't going to be a client of ours anymore, and we will dob them into HMRC. It's just not acceptable at any level.
And I think what we would also say, shooting from the hip in a bit the way that you have done actually, if APSCo find that members are doing that, we will withdraw membership from companies that are not playing fairly, because we take 20 references on any organisation joining APSCo to make sure they are in essence right staff to be part of a trade body and to wear that badge that we've worked for 20 years to create. The expectation is that we will play fair for something that's cost the government and us taxpayers a lot of money to support businesses and individuals through a difficult period. So I think we've all been pretty firm on that, which is a good message.
A more practical tip on the furloughing aspect, can people work, can't people work? You don't have to keep someone on furlough for the whole of this. So you can, and I've seen a lot of clients who they've agreed with their teams that they're going to put them in furlough on a rotation basis.
With 3 weeks being the minimum amount.
Yeah, exactly. So, they've been agreeing that if it's a team of 3, for example, 2 will go out on furlough, 1 will remain in the business for 3 weeks, and then they'll just rotate, and they'll rotate and they'll rotate. So at any one time, a third of their work staff will actually still be there, still working, still doing everything they can. Frankly, the work levels are going to be lower. So you don't necessarily need as many people to do the work, depending on what part of the business it is, obviously. So that could work pretty well, I think, in relation to keeping those relationships going, keeping everything going, but while still, reducing the cost base, but being legitimate as well.
Yeah, and my understanding is that the sort of mean average numbers or percentage of staff being furloughed across the general business population is about a third of staff are being furloughed. My understanding in the recruitment market, we do a weekly survey that asks these questions, is it's higher than that, probably with a view that a number of businesses are furloughing a large percentage of their sales-oriented staff. Although what I would say is there is business to be done out there. Just be careful that you keep coverage and that you are not missing out on opportunities that really do exist and that other companies are capitalizing on by keeping a decent sales team there. Let me go to the next question. We're coming towards the tail end of our session. This is another one on furloughing. We always get lots on furloughing. If a contractor's current end date expires before the end of a minimum 3-week furlough period, can we ask the client to extend that contract and then still claim? Tania.
It's very unclear, the rules around furloughing contractors. Fundamentally, if they're on your payroll on the 28th of February, there is scope to furlough them. And there's nothing in the guidance that dictates they have to be on a live assignment. My view, so when speaking to EAS, even employment agency standards are saying, well, ultimately it comes down to a business decision. It is your business's decision who to furlough and how long to furlough. And for me, I feel there's some, using live assignment as a criteria makes some sense, but as the guidance stands, that person could stay on furlough even as long as your contract continues to exist, even if there's not a live assignment. And I think that's the key point. An umbrella contract is overarching. It continues to exist, even if there's not a placement. Agency worker contracts, some of them do continue to exist between assignments. Others don't. They actually terminate if there's not an assignment. So I think actually that's the critical point you've got to look at here and to see whether the contract continues to exist if there's no assignment, because if it doesn't, then effectively the furlough's going to end. If it does, then I think potentially you could keep them on furlough for the 3 weeks, even if there wasn't a live assignment. Barry, I don't know whether you disagree or have anything else to add on that one.
View, Barry.
I know we're very short on time.
Yeah, and I think you're broadly right. This is not the sort of like the litmus test for legal decision making, but in these sort of situations, I talk about the judge test and the mum test. So there's a grey area between what a judge would say was right and wrong, and what your mum might be embarrassed about. So generally speaking, when it comes to ethical decisions or moral decisions, when there's uncertainty, if my mum would be happy with what I'm doing, then I'm happy to do it. If my mum thinks I would be, chancing my arm or getting it wrong or being, underhand, then generally speaking, that's my litmus test. If I couldn't discuss it openly with my mum and be proud of what I was doing, then I don't do it. And I think this falls into that sort of category.
I think the mum test sounds like a very good one. Being a mum of a whole load of people, I think that's a good test. Let me ask for an answer quickly on this next one, and then I'm going to ask a bigger question afterwards for everybody. But this quick one is, for employees on furlough, should employers still be deducting costs such as travel loans? Tania. This is a quick one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it depends on the contract. I mean, they have to deduct statutory stuff like student loans. As to a travel loan, it's coming out of the employees. I might have to come back on that, I have to say. I mean, it's clearly not in the guidance, but it's government money. So whether you should continue to get repayment of loans that effectively the employee still owes you. I might need to think about that. It's not.
Harry, do you have a view? What would your mum think of this?
I've got a practical solution. Just cancel the travel card. Most TfL, most international rail lines, they allow you to travel the travel card and then get it back again when we get out to the other side of this. And it's a non-problem, right?
Okay, well, that's a quick win, I would say. All right, let me come to my final question. What would our panel, Bev, I'm going to come to you first of all, if that's okay. What does our panel see for their own business, and we're each in different businesses, as the way moving forward or the way moving out of this? What are the plans for a company such as Harvey Nash to move forward?
Sure, thanks. So we're probably going to see different countries across the globe in our business starting to come back online sooner. And so, we're already thinking about, how we'll do that. At what point will we deem it being safe to go back into the office? And then what will the office look like afterwards? We're asking ourselves that question as well. We now know fully that we can operate our business in this way. So do we need people in as often as they currently are? Can we make it a much more pleasant place for people to be if they have a better mix? So we're starting to think about those practical questions as well. And then we're also starting to think about, the kind of new solutions that we're developing off the back of what we're learning in these markets and how quickly we're going to put them out there. But fundamentally, it's going to be, a safety before anything else, no matter what the government guidance is in any country. People first, always.
And are you going to be changing your budget forecasts now, or wait a little bit later on to look at what the year's going to pan out as being a good year or a bad year for Harvey Nash? Yes,
so I've been on a panel a few times in this last couple of weeks, and actually a few people were saying, well, I've given up on the year. I have not, definitely not. We're early in our year. We start our year at the beginning of February. So we're taking rolling forecasts for our entire business every week now, and we're looking at a 3-month window. It's a moving feast. We're not seeing massive differences since, we started to work from home. But nonetheless, we will keep a view on that. We're optimistic for the future. We're optimistic that this will come back strongly. So, my head's up, our team's head's up. And no, right now, we're after the year.
Okay, thank you. What would you say with Introprotect? Have you made a change to what your view is in the business moving forward? Is this boon time for you?
Yeah, I mean, I say it without any sort of smile on my face, but we're definitely a lot busier than we were a few weeks ago. It comes with some risks because we're contingent, so we only charge when we recover money. So there's a risk there for us that we could be taking on a lot of work where ultimately the fee doesn't get paid. So we can become very busy fools by looking like we're busy but actually getting no revenue at the other end of it. So there's some fairly significant risks for us there in the business. What I've taken away from it so far is a couple of major things. About a third of our staff were already remote workers. We got people out in New York. We got people more local who just work remotely. This has just proven how possible it is. So we're going to cast our net a lot wider and broader when it comes to finding people to work with us, because I really even more bought into the fact that we don't need people physically in our office to do our work. So that's a really big advantage for us. We're also accelerating a couple of plans that we had in the works. We were planning to put a mediation solution together so that clients and recruiters can go through a mediation process rather than always having to have a fight. And then as well as that, we were and are now accelerating our plans to set up our own arbitration service so that recruiters and clients, again, don't have to go through the long, expensive process of court proceedings when we can have single joint arbitrators set up to do these things in a much more streamlined fashion. So we're going to put those online a hell of a lot quicker, which means even more late nights for me in the next few weeks and months. But, that's what we've got to do.
Okay, thank you. Let me close off. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for Tania as ever. Thank you to Bev White, newly in that role in Harvey Nash, an amazingly interesting time, but someone with an awful lot of experience to drive that ship further and quicker even than it has done. And then also thank you to you, Barry Cullen from Introprotect. Definitely a resource that APSCo members and other recruitment companies should be using at the moment to give themselves the best opportunity to be paid. Thank you to everybody for giving me your time and for your candidness, and I really appreciate it. I always say at the end of these sessions, my view is with the recruitment market as with any other, you are sowing at the moment and you will reap as we come out of this. This is a situation to be appropriately behaved and treat everybody in the way that you would like to be treated yourself. And I see it as an opportunity to ensure that your profile and your reputation is held in the highest state. And good luck and stay safe out there, and pretty obviously stay at home during Easter. Thank you very much indeed for everybody in. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you. Bye-bye.